There's around 900,000 islands dotted around the world that range from small rocky outcrops to large island nations. There's such a huge variety of island types depending on how they were originally formed, and some islands don't have natural beginnings. So join me for today's video as we take a look through 15 of the rarest islands on Earth. Number 15. Socotra Island, Yemen. Around 240 miles to the south of the Arabian Peninsula is the Socotra Archipelago, a collection of 4 islands that are governed by Yemen. By far the largest of those islands is Socotra itself, and after originally being part of a larger continent, the land detached and became isolated around 10 to 15 million years ago. This means that all life on the island has evolved in its own way, unaffected by what's happened elsewhere, and has led Socotra to being described as the most alien-looking place on Earth. A recent study found Socotra to have 700 endemic species, making it just as biodiverse as places like the Galapagos Islands, New Zealand, and Hawaii. Probably the most famous species is the dragon's blood tree, which looks like an upturned umbrella and oozes a deep crimson sap. But Socotra is also home to a number of other unusual trees, as well as countless birds, 31 unique species of lizards, a few spiders including the blue baboon tarantula, and 3 species of freshwater crabs. The only mammals native to the island are bats, and the surrounding waters host some of the most diverse and stunning reefs anywhere on Earth. It's no wonder then that the region has been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site and has recently become part of a territorial dispute, with troops from the United Arab Emirates having taken control of the landmass in 2018. Number 14. Tashirojima Island, Japan. The Japanese archipelago is made up of 6,852 islands, many of which have their own unique history and unusual quirks. One of the most interesting is Tashirojima Island, which covers an area of just 1.2 square miles and is off the coast of the Oshika Peninsula in the Pacific Ocean. It's more affectionately known as Cat Island because this place has an enormous stray cat population, with locals and visitors believing that the act of feeding them will bring good luck. The reason for this can be traced back to the original communities that lived there in the early 17th century during the late Edo period. Most of the people who lived on Tashirojima raised silkworms to produce materials for the textile industry, and they all had cats to chase the mice that like to feed on the worms. In fact, in 1602, a law was passed across the whole of Japan to free all pet cats to counter this problem, and with no natural predators, they were able to run rampant on Tashirojima in particular. Now, the human population is far outnumbered by felines, with a study in 2015 finding that, with around 80 people living there permanently, just one of the villages had at least 150 cats, with countless more elsewhere. No dogs are allowed to be kept as pets, and there are several shrines spread out over the island that are dedicated to cats, and are where fishermen leave scraps from their catch in order to improve their luck next time they venture out into the ocean. Number 13. Rapa Nui Chile. Rapa Nui, which is more commonly known as Easter Island, is one of the more famous remote islands around the world because of the presence of almost 1,000 monumental structures, known as moai, that were placed across the land by the Rapa Nui people around 1,000 to 6,000 years ago. The island itself is overseen by Chile and lies at the southeastern point of the Polynesian Triangle in the Pacific, which places it 2,100 miles from the Chilean mainland. It's believed the first people traveled there by canoe from the Cook Islands or Gambier Islands, which is a journey of up to 1,600 miles, and they were soon able to establish a thriving community there. As the island was formed by volcanic activity, it's made up of various rock types, and it was these that the Rapa Nui used to create the moai. In total, there are 887 of them, which were made from a combination of basalt, obsidian, red scoria, and tuff. And while they're often referred to as the Easter Island heads, they all have torsos too, and some even have knelt legs. Amazingly, only 1 in 4 that were carved were actually installed in their intended place, which was mainly overlooking the ocean, and it took a team of 6 people a full year to finish each one. The largest weighs a massive 90 tons, and it would have taken a monumental effort to move from Macquarie to its cliffside position. Unfortunately, it was the arrival of explorers and the violent annexation by Chile that significantly reduced the number of original people and brought the end to the moai building tradition. With all this lost knowledge, the meaning behind the impressive monuments has been forgotten too, and we can only wonder at the cultural significance that they had. Number 12. Islas Uros, Peru. You'd normally think of an island as being a natural formation, or one that's been artificially created by moving hundreds of tons of rock and sediment. But in Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, there are around 120 islands that are completely different. They belong to the Uru people, whose ancestors laid claim to the waters of the lake. To help defend themselves and access remote regions to fish, they built a series of floating islands from reeds. This method is still used to this day, and it's amazing to see. They begin by making boats from totora reeds and then collect further reeds and roots that are tied together by rope. By building them up layer after layer, the floating platforms are 6 feet thick and are anchored in position by being tied to eucalyptus poles that are buried into the lake floor. The largest of these islands have room for homes for up to 10 families and require a new layer to be added every few weeks to remain stable. The islands last for around 30 years before needing to be completely replaced and are still the main residences for several hundred people. The surface of each island is soft, and each step you'll take you'll notice your foot sinking in a few inches. Unsurprisingly now, they're a popular tourist destination, and rather than working the lake for income, most residents now offer tours and lessons on how to prepare the reeds for construction. Number 11. Diavik Diamond Mine, Canada. Located in the North Slave region of the Northwest Territories and Canada, around 190 miles to the northeast of Yellowknife, is Lac de Gras, which is more commonly known as East Island. Covering an area of about 7.7 square miles, it's an extremely remote region that's just 140 miles to the south of the Arctic Circle, but seen a huge amount of development in the past 20 years to become one of the most productive diamond mines in the country. That's because it sits above 4 kimberlite pipes that allow the mine to produce approximately 7 million carats of the precious stones each year. Amazingly, construction on the site only began in 2001, but today there's 2 main open pits, a large airstrip that can be used by 737s and C-130s, as well as power plants, administrative buildings, and accommodation for the workers. It's been a huge undertaking, but one that's proven to be extremely profitable for the companies involved. It's been so successful that in 2018, a 552-carat yellow diamond was found that holds the record for being the largest one ever found in North America. With estimates suggesting that there's at least 20 years of mining still to go on at the site, this record is expected to be broken again, making this undoubtedly one of the rarest islands on the planet. Number 10. Clipperton Island, Pacific Ocean. The simply stunning Clipperton Island is a French-administered coral atoll that's in the Pacific Ocean, lying around 580 miles from the western coast of Mexico and 2,900 miles from the island of Tahiti. It's an astonishing 6,600 miles from Paris, where it's ruled from. There has, of course, been a dispute between France and Mexico about who should control the atoll, and the agreement was reached through arbitration in 1931 that's a case study about international law that's still often studied to this day. There aren't actually any permanent residents on the island, and its name comes from an English pirate who is believed to have used it as his base of operations while attacking the Spanish fleet. It was inhabited for a time but was officially evacuated in 1917, but there have been occasional residents since then, mainly survivors of shipwrecks who have managed to make their way there to escape the ocean. It's also become somewhat of a curiosity for amateur radio groups because of its remoteness, and occasionally sees expeditions landing there to see how many people they can make contact with from the glorious sandy shores. Number 9. Sealand, England. During the Second World War, British authorities built a series of sea forts at strategic positions along the coastline to act as a first line of defense against a potential invasion from the European continent. And since the end of the war, they've mostly fallen into a state of disrepair. There's one, though, that's in the North Sea around 6.5 miles from the Suffolk coast that has a more storied history. Known as Fort Ruffs, it was built on a sandbar and formed an artificial island that was outside the nautical claim of the UK at the time, and within international waters. Covering an area of around an acre, it was home to as many as 300 Navy personnel during the war, but after being decommissioned, it became a hideout for pirate radio broadcasters. It was then, however, taken over by Paddy Roy Bates in 1967, at first as a base for a new pirate radio station, but he subsequently declared independence and renamed it the Principality of Sealand. Disputes have continued since then about the legality of this, particularly when Britain's nautical claims were extended to encompass the former fort, but it's seen by many as the world's smallest nation and as the smallest area to lay claim to nation status. At one point, they were sent a diplomat from Germany, and the pseudo-country even has its own football team, flag, and national anthem. Number 8. North Sentinel Island, India. North Sentinel Island has in recent years become one of the most famous unexplored places in the world. It's part of the Andaman Archipelago that's in the Bay of Bengal in India. And while the island itself is easily accessible, trips to its shores are expressly forbidden because it's home to one of the last completely isolated tribes on Earth. Not only do authorities want to prevent the introduction of diseases to the islanders, but the people that live there aren't exactly welcoming to outsiders. Fishermen and more recently an American missionary have been killed on sight by locals, which means that even visits by anthropologists and researchers are restricted. This has been the case for hundreds of years, and only a handful of outsiders have ever set foot on the island and returned to tell the tale. The reason for their unwelcoming stance is likely to do with how the people were treated when they were first discovered by the outside world. In a series of events that saw some of them being killed or kidnapped by sailors over the past few centuries, which would be enough to make you wary of anybody. One day it's hoped that relations will cool down, but for now the plan is to let them live in peace and without interference. Number 7. Macquarie Island, Australia. Despite being closest to New Zealand, Macquarie Island has since 1900 been part of Tasmania, Australia, and it's one of the closest inhabited islands to Antarctica. It's used by the Australian Antarctic Division as a base of operations for studying the White Continent, and there's usually around 20 to 40 people permanently stationed there. It covers an area of around 49 square miles, and it has throughout history been a place of legend, with stories telling of buried treasure and hunters using it as a staging post to venture further towards Antarctica. And since 1933, it's been part of a protected wildlife reserve because the island itself has an incredible array of wildlife. It's here that you'll find the largest penguin populations outside of Antarctica, for example, with many millions of 5 different penguin species traveling to breed there each year. There's also tens of thousands of seals there too, which represent 4 rare species, along with countless other birds and insects. It was very nearly not like this though, because before it became a protected site, the seals and penguins were hunted to near extinction by oil producers. Now though, their populations have been able to almost fully recover, and it's one of the best places to study them without incurring the vast expense of a full expedition to the Antarctic. Number 6. Flatey, Senegal. There are a number of man-made islands around the world, but probably the most unique of all of them is Flatey, which lies off the coast of Senegal. Visitors notice something unusual about the place the moment they set foot there, when they hear a strange crunching sound beneath their feet. And that's because rather than being made of volcanic processes or by land reclamation, Flatey has been completely formed by the discarded shells from the clam fishing industry. Millions upon millions of the shells have accumulated over the generations, and they're now incorporated into everything, from the paths you walk across to the materials used in buildings. While the main island is impressive enough, a short walk across a wooden bridge will take you to a second island that's also made entirely of shells. But this one is the local community's dedicated graveyard. It is one of the most surreal but beautiful memorial spaces you'll ever see, and one that people travel to from far and wide to witness for themselves. Number 5. Tristan da Cunha, United Kingdom. Tristan da Cunha is a group of volcanic islands in the South Atlantic Ocean. The archipelago is 1,511 miles from Cape Town and 2,166 miles from the Falkland Islands, which makes it easily the most remote inhabited place on Earth. It takes 6 days to reach the only town, Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, by boat, which makes it a tough place to visit and an even tougher place for the 300 locals who live there. At just 7 miles long, it's a fairly small island too, but there's a reason why people visit here: the amazing wildlife. The nearby islands are home to rockhopper penguins, sooty albatrosses, and hundreds of other species. It's also a historically important place that was used as a stopover by those crossing the Atlantic by boat. Some cruises still stop here, but if you want to visit, you'll have to board the occasional supply vessel. But even that isn't easy. Tourists are at the bottom of an 8-tier hierarchy, which prioritizes the transports of residents, emergency crews, and official visits over any other. If you want to get as far away from everything as possible, though, there is no better place than Tristan da Cunha. Number 4. Howland Island, the Pacific Ocean. Found in the central Pacific around 1,700 miles to the south of Honolulu, Howland Island is one of the remotest parts of the United States. Described as having an elongated cucumber shape, it covers an area of around 1 square mile and is part of a protected wildlife refuge that encompasses a region of submerged land around it that's rich in aquatic life. There was a period in the 19th century when the island was mined for its vast guano deposits, but now there's no permanent population or any economic activity in the area. But it's probably most famous for being the place that Amelia Earhart was meant to land on as part of her round-the-world flight, but vanished before she was able to reach it. Interestingly, there is some aircraft wreckage on the island, although it's not linked to her, and in the 1930s a lighthouse was built and named after her to prevent ships from being caught out on the shallow reefs. As there are no residents, the island doesn't actually have an official time zone and is instead within a region called the International Dateline West, or Anywhere on Earth, which is the last area on the planet to reach the end of each day. Number 3. Flatey Island, Iceland. Unlike most islands that are either formed by volcanoes or by the separation of continents, Flatey Island, along with its surrounding island group, is believed to have been formed underneath the weight of a huge glacier during the last ice age. It's off the northwestern coast of Iceland and covers an area of just 1/5 of a square mile, or half a square kilometer, and is mostly flat. Surprisingly, despite its remote location and cold climate, it's been inhabited for almost 1,000 years and was once a cultural center of Iceland. There was once a monastery on the highest point, and it became a commercial hub for the northwestern region of the country. And now there's a village, a ferry dock, and a road that connects the two. Even though it's no longer an important trade route, the island is still a popular destination for tourists, and the population virtually doubles each summer from those looking for a peaceful escape. Surrounded by just sheep and migratory birds, it's a great place to experience natural Icelandic scenery, and the residents are, understandably, trying to limit development as much as possible to preserve the quaint island for the future. Number 2. Miyake-jima Island, Japan. South of Tokyo is the island of Miyake-jima, which has been formed on top of an active volcano chain. But despite there having been 6 eruptions in the past century alone, lava flows and landslides are the biggest threat that visitors and residents face. The continued volcanic activity means that this island is subjected to some of the highest concentrations of poisonous gases in the world, primarily containing sulfur, and they can be released with such unpredictability that people on the island used to be required to carry a gas mask with them at all times. While this law isn't enforced anymore, there are warning sirens across the island to warn everyone if levels are reaching a dangerous point, and no one's ever particularly far away from an emergency gas mask if they're needed. In 2000, the level of gases seeping up from the ground became so extreme following the eruption of the island's main volcano, Mount Oyama, that a mass evacuation had to be ordered. The risk was so great that residents weren't allowed to return home, even to retrieve possessions, for 5 years. And planes were diverted from flying through the region for 8 years because of the levels of noxious substances in the air. Number 1. Tory Island, Ireland. If you've ever dreamed of being the king or queen of your own island, then there's only one place in the world where this is possible, unless you were born into the right family. Tory Island, which is just under 8 miles off the northwestern coast of County Donegal in Ireland, covers an area of just 1.4 square miles and has a population of around 120 people. As part of a long-held tradition, a king or queen is elected by the residents, and while they have no legal powers, they have ceremonial duties that include speaking on behalf of the island and welcoming visitors when they arrive. Anyone can nominate themselves for this role, but the last person to be elected held it between the early 1990s and 2018, so it's a competitive position to say the least. Beyond the traditions, Tory Island is a popular retreat for artists and has its own art gallery to display the works of the locals. It's also a region that's designated as an important bird area, where it's particularly known for being a breeding ground for corncrakes, which are a globally threatened species that's on the verge of extinction. We'll see you next time.
Watch our nature playlist for more top 15 videos about beautiful nature. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best nature videos.